Right now, with the cloud, everybody wants to know Azure Active Directory, but taking a trip back can be really useful. So what I'm going to do in this session is take a look at Active Directory domain services from Windows Server. How does it work? What does it do? And can I do a deep dive in 30 minutes? Let's find out. Greetings, my fellow YouTubers. Welcome back to the channel. I really appreciate you stopping by. Andy Malone, Microsoft MVP, as well as a Microsoft Certified Trainer. In this episode, I'm going to take a look at Active Directory domain services. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Andy, that's old stuff. We should be learning Azure Active Directory. I know. I've done plenty of videos of that on this channel. But Active Directory domain services is such an important skill, especially if you want to move your IT career forward. So in this session, what I thought I'd do is just take 20 to 30 minutes and really go deep on exactly what you need to know about Active Directory. So we're going to talk about the logical approach to it, so the structure of it. We'll talk about the physical aspects of it, for example, replication, how it works, how it's structured, and really, it's going to be a busy session. So, as they say, buckle up and get ready to learn. Now, if you've not subscribed to the session, please go ahead, click on that subscribe button, ring that bell, and you won't miss out on the good stuff in the future. And as always, I love your comments, your questions, and your feedback. So just get them down below there, and I'll do my best for you. All right, so I think without any more jibber jabber, I think it's about time we get into some demos. Let's go. So let's see if we can do Active Directory for beginners in 30 minutes. So who am I? Just a quick reminder, I'm a Microsoft Certified Trainer as well as a Microsoft MVP. Now, when we talk about Active Directory, of course, it's an identity platform. And an identity platform obviously involves walking up to a desk in a building. So this is our analogy. So you're getting into the computer system. So we walk up to the desk, we present our credentials or our username and our method of authentication. So whether that be a password, whether it be some kind of card entry, biometrics, once you get admitted, you're in the door. Now, once in the building, of course, you can then be further scrutinized and given permissions to certain resources, depending on the role that you play in the organization or the permissions that you have. So when we talk about a directory service, Active Directory actually goes back to about Windows 2000, back in the early days. That's quite a few years ago now. Before that, though, the first kind of Microsoft directory service was actually a product called Windows NT. So in 2000, we had Windows 2000, and really Active Directory really took form then. So what is a directory service? Well, in essence, it's a database. It's a database of objects, so users, groups, computers, and so on. Now, to be honest, it's advanced over the years, and this is Windows Server Active Directory. And the two ways to look at it, you can look at it from a logical perspective, so the structure, how you've laid it out, and also a physical perspective as well. So from the physical perspective, we look at it from the actual database. So how do we back up the database? How do we replicate the database to another server? Because, of course, if you just have it installed on one server, then potentially, if something went wrong with that server, you would lose all your users and everything. So, again, we don't want that. You want to replicate that. So in essence, what we have is Active Directory domain services. This is the directory services of Windows Server, both 2016, 2019, and now 2022 as well. If you, for example, were using Windows Explorer, and you can see that this does actually look a little bit like that. So organizing your users we don't put them in folders, we actually arrange them into something called organizational units. And you can organize organizational units by location, by department, function, and so on. So I can create my users, computers, groups, and I can organize them in there. Now, of course, I said that Active Directory is a database, and databases have objects. So a user object, a group object, and a device object. And objects have attributes. So a user's first name, last name, email address, and so on. The complete set of object types in Active Directory, we refer to it as the schema. Okay, and you can, as I said, organize your users into these organizational units. And I'm going to be doing some demos in a moment. Okay, so that's the first thing that we have then. All right, now from the physical side of Active Directory, and again, I'm going to give you a nice demo of this in a moment. In this example, we have obviously DC1, and DC1 contains a master copy of our account directory. So obviously, you don't just want to store Active Directory database on DC1. So you want to replicate that. Now, you can replicate it for a number of reasons. You can replicate it for disaster recovery reasons, and you can also replicate it for performance reasons or load balancing. So as I said, in this example, we have two sites. We've got site A, let's say London, and we've got site B in New York. So in site A, I've got 3 servers that have installed Active Directory on, and these are replicating copies of the database. And we refer to these machines as DCs or domain controllers. And within a site, you can see that we have something called intra-site replication. Now, intra-site replication basically means that these replicate automatically. For example, you don't need to schedule these. So it assumes that you have a very high speed bandwidth. However, if you have remote sites and you don't have a high speed bandwidth, then we can use something called inter-site replication. Now, in the slide here, it talks about RPC or SMTP connections, remote procedure calls. Now, this doesn't exist anymore because obviously since this slide was written, we now have the delights of broadband and superfast connections, which make things easier. But the principle, just remember the principle, if it's within a site, it's called intra-site, and if it's between sites, it's called inter-site replication. Now, again, with Windows Server Active Directory, you can have a number of companies. So you can see here that we've got a company called Acame.com, and depending on the size of your companies, you might want to create different or what we call child domains. And a child domain might be for a very large corporation, and let's say you've got offices all around the world and you want to have an IT team dedicated to that particular domain. But also you might want to mask, for example, for security reasons, you might not, for example, want the sales team to have access to the engineering components and so on. So moving right up to date, one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this presentation was obviously we're all learning about this. This is Microsoft's Azure Active Directory, and this is Microsoft's Identity as a Service platform. So rather than having the database on your domain controllers installed on premises, what we now have is we have the databases stored in Azure. And Azure, Microsoft maintain all the databases, they structure it, they manage it for us, so you don't need to worry about all of that. We don't have OUs as such, but the thing about Azure is it's a little bit like, again, File Explorer. So think about the C drive on your computer as being Azure Active Directory. Well, in this case, you can see that you have your own tenant or folder. So all your users, all your management features are managed within your own individual tenant. And again, you can create users, groups, devices, and so on. And like before, these devices also give you access to multiple resources. And again, they have attributes, first names, last names, and email addresses, and so on. And the nice thing about Azure is you can have multiple customers. So you can have multiple accounts, different tenants, and you can share resources between those tenants. Now, this particular session, I'm going to focus on Active Directory. If you want to see my sessions on Azure, then please have a look. I've already recorded some of these on my YouTube channel. So to understand Active Directory, we start here in our Windows server. Now this particular machine has got Active Directory already pre-installed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click up here and I'm going to go into Server Manager. And Server Manager is our main portal that manages kind of all our features and functionality. Now just to let you know that if you purchase Windows Server or you download it, it actually comes in with no roles or no features installed on it. So one of the first things that you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and obviously install the features and functionality that you want. And to do that, essentially we go up here and to tools to manage all the features that are currently installed. But also if you go into manage, this is where you can add roles and features. Now, adding roles are the major functions of the computer. So things like Active Directory domain services, your domain name services, and various other features like that. And you can see it's asking me which server do I want to go ahead and install that on. So you can set this up on a server if you have a pool of servers. So you can manage multiple servers here, or you can install it on a particular virtual hard disk. For the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to click on Next here. And you can see here at the moment we've got DNS and we've got Active Directory domain services installed. Now, how did I install that? I'm going to leave that for another video because obviously not enough time here, but I'll certainly go through that in a future session. So here you can see that I've got all the different roles that you can install on a Windows server. Now, I'll be honest with you, Windows hasn't really changed that much in a number of years. So if you're familiar with it from the likes of Windows Server 2012, then coming to this in Windows Server 2019 or 2022, to be honest, it's not going to be hugely different for you. If you click on Next, it now asks you if you want to install features. And the features they're important features, but they're not as big as the roles. So once you select those features, click on Install, and off it goes, and it will install the role. So to manage the role, as I mentioned, we can go up here into Tools. And really, you've got a number of tools that you can manage. You see, once Active Directory is installed, you've now got a number of dedicated Active Directory tools. And the first of those, the most primary tool, I would say, is probably Active Directory Users and Computers. And this is where we manage the logical aspects of Active Directory. Logical aspects, I mean the just general design of how it looks. Now you can see here, if you're familiar with Windows File Manager, for example, or File Explorer as it's now known, you'll see that it looks somewhat similar. So up here at the top, we've got our domain name, and my domain name here is called adatum.com. And adatum.com, you can see, contains a number of built-in groups and features here. Now, the yellow folders here, we actually call these organizational units, and you can pretty much guess what that means. So if I didn't use organizational units, I could just have a big default folder called users, and you could put basically everything in there, and it's not very organized. So probably one of the things that you probably want to do is you probably want to create organizational units based on location or based on department needs or things like that. So for example here, I'm going to create a new organizational unit just by either right-clicking on the right-hand mouse menu here, or there's also buttons here on the toolbar that will do the same thing. So I'm going to go up, I'm going to create new, and I'm going to create a new organizational unit. And in here, just pull that over slightly, I'm going to call this operations. Okay, so I'm going to call this operations. Now, you can see here, protect the container from accidental deletion, and it's actually switched on. So if you want that on or off, you can go ahead and switch that. So I've now created an OU, and the next thing I probably want to do is create some users in here. So I'm going to create a new user account in here. So I can create a new user, and this user, I'm going to call this, I'm a bit of a Trekkie, as anybody knows. So I'm going to call this guy Jean-Luc, and I'm going to call him Jean-Luc Picard. So I'm going to give him a username of Picard J. Now, just a tip about usernames, you wouldn't call the user Robert or Karen or something like that, because you could have a company that's got many users called John or Karen or Bob. So it's a good idea to use the surname followed by an initial. And you can see that this is giving this user a logon name. Now you'll notice that there's two types of logon name here. So Picard J at company.com and a datum / Picard J. So this is kind of, this is typically Windows, like a Windows type login. But if you're moving to the cloud, for example, into Microsoft 365, you'll be familiar with this type of login format. This is called a UPN, a user principal name type login. So I'm going to click next, and of course I'm going to put in a password for Captain Picard here. So I'm going to just put that password in here. And again, you can say the user can change their password at next logon. User cannot change their password. The password never expires. You might use these if it's, for example, a service account or something like that. And of course, if you're not ready for Jean-Luc to join the organization yet, you can actually go ahead and disable the account. So I've created the account, off it goes, and it now creates Jean-Luc's account. Now, so that's the first thing. So creating a user account, really, really easy. Like I said, creating new and user, and the rest is pretty self-explanatory as well. Now, another type of thing that you might want to create is a group. So a group, of course, allows you to manage multiple users. Hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to create another user just so that Jean-Luc's got some company. So this time I'm going to create a user called James Kirk. And of course, James Kirk will have a username of Kirk J. And I'll click next. And again, I'm going to put in a password for the user. And I'm going to say that the user can change their own password at their next login. And I'm going to finish. And you can see I've now got a couple of users in here. Now, again, I'm going to now go into new. And this time, instead of creating a user, I'm going to go in, I'm going to create a group. Okay. Now, we've got a number of different types of groups in Windows Server. I'm going to call this my managers group. I'm going to call this, in fact, you know, just to differentiate it, I'm just going to call it Ops Managers. Okay. So this is my Ops Managers. And is it a domain local or is it a global? To be honest, in this case, I've only got one domain, so it's not really a problem. If I had multiple domains, you could create global groups, and you could create domain local groups that are specific to a local domain. But as I say, in this case, it really doesn't matter because I've only got one domain that I'm working with. Okay, so I'm going to click on here, and what I can now do with these users, I can now, of course, add these users to a group, and I'm just going to call this ops. And as I start to type, I can click on check name, and you can see it says, yes, this name exists already, and I'm going to click OK, and I've now added those users to a group. Now, why would I do that? Because it's easier to assign permissions to resources, to groups, rather than individual users. Okay, so again, my whistle-stop tour of Active Directory. I'm now going to go into the properties of my user, and let's have a look at some of the resources in here that we can see. So first of all, you'll notice that we have a number of tabs. Active Directory, of course, is a database, and a database has objects. So Jean-Luc is an object in my database. He's a user in my database. We can also have groups, we can have devices, and so on. So you can see that every object has attributes. So a first name, last name, email address, and so on. Okay, so I can go in and fill that in if I want to. And there's a couple of tabs here that you can do that. Member of shows me if the user is a member of some groups. Dial in, I can take a trip back to the 1990s if I want to. Well, I'm not going to bother with that this time. And again here, if you wanted the, you can do an environment thing. So when the user logs in, start this program and so on, which is, it might be quite useful. Again, if you click onto the sessions, you can set timeouts for the user sessions here. Again, depending on, you might work in a call center or something like that. That might be quite useful. All right. Remote control, enable remote control. So if you're using remote control or remote desktop and it's switched on here, you'll be able to go in and help the user if they're having problems. All right. Other useful things here, the most useful one is probably the account tab. So the account tab here, you can do things like, I can click on to log on hours, and you might say, okay, from midnight to 6 a.m., I don't want the user to log on because that's when you might do backups, for example. And I could then say, okay, from 8, let's say, to midnight, again, I don't want the user to log in. Now, you would do this for every user, possibly, okay? And you can this is quite useful to do that. Okay. Other things here, again, log on to. So again, do you want the user to log on to all computers or only these computers? So again, quite useful. We've got some password options here. So things like user cannot change the password, never expires. And this is a useful one, by the way, if you bring in, for example, contractors. So if you're bringing in contractors, you can expire their user account after a certain amount of time. Again, very, very useful. Again, the other thing that we've got here is the profile. So user profiles here. So if you've got a shared folder, I think I did a session on this recently, actually. So go ahead and check out that. Okay, so that's creating a user and creating a group. So as I've mentioned, this is pretty much the logical aspects of Active Directory. For the next part, we want to take a look at the physical side of Active Directory. Now, just to understand what I mentioned, I said that Active Directory is actually a database. And you can see the database by going into the Windows folder on your domain controller's C drive. If you scroll down, you'll see a folder here called NTDS, NT Directory Services. So if I click into here, this is the golden ticket, ntds.dit. This is your Active Directory database. And the other things that we've got here are essentially log files. and check files. So in essence, what happens is, like most databases, when a user is performing transactions in Active Directory, users are logging on, logging off, you're doing maintenance, those operations are taking place in memory. Once they've been in memory, they then get written to a log file, and then after the log file reaches a certain size, so for example, what I don't know, 5 gigs, let's say, those transactions are then written to Active Directory or to the database. So that's what it is. So Active Directory is a physical database, to understand. Now, of course, the problems with that are obvious. If I install one Active Directory domain controller, then that's a single point of failure. So one of the great things about Active Directory is that you can have multiple domain controllers. Now in my demo here, I've only got one domain controller in my environment, but let me show you what you would do. So I'm going to go up into Tools here, and for this, there are a couple of tools for the physical side. So the first one is Active Directory Sites and Services. Now, in our little organization here, you can see that if I go into Sites here, we have got a default first site. Okay, so this is my default first site name. I can double click this, and in here you can see that it says NTDS settings. Again, I can double click that and we can have a look at it. So at the moment, my domain controller is DC1, and it's actually in my default first site, okay? And we can see that you've got various options for caching group membership, for example, which will obviously improve things like performance and so on. So that's the first thing. That's where the domain controller goes. Now, you'll remember from the slide at the beginning of this presentation that I talked about intra-site replication and intra-site replication. So basically, if I had multiple domain controllers within this site, and you can see it says servers, and at the moment I've only got DC1. So if there were other servers in here, it would replicate copies of the Active Directory database. And if I double click this, you can see this is the actual settings for that individual domain controller. Okay, and as I said, at the moment there's nothing here because, to be honest, there's only one domain controller. All right, now if I just click into the NTDS settings, and if I go into properties on that setting, you can see that one thing that you'll notice about Active Directory is that Active Directory, like Azure Active Directory, objects are sometimes represented by what we call a GUID, a globally unique ID, which is this big long hexadecimal number. Now it shows me the connection detail. So within a site, of course, it uses intra-site. So in other words, if you've got multiple domain controllers, they're constantly updating each other. And to be honest, you can't control the when and how it actually replicates because it's intra-site. Now, if you have multiple sites within your organization, so depending on the size of your company, you may want to create another site. So I can come down here, and if I just click into sites here, for example, and I can come down, I can say, hey, I want to go and create a new site, and I'll call this Oslo. Okay, so I'll call it my Oslo site. All right, and it's saying, do you want to use this site link? I'll say yes, that's fine. Now, if you don't have this site link, at the moment you can create different links. Now, remember that Active Directory was written for a different time. So back in the 1990s, we didn't have the scalability and we didn't have the network speeds that we do now. But fortunately now we do. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to click onto that, and you can see it's now created this Oslo site, and it's got a little folder for servers. So again, what I could do is if I've got multiple servers here, I could easily move those servers into this site. So I've got two sites. By the way, you can rename that default site if you want to call it something else as well. Okay, so that's the first thing from a physical perspective. So as I said, it's a physical database, and you can control the replication by organizing your domain controllers into sites where they're located. And here you can see that this is now inter-site. So that being the case, one of the things you might want to control is how the replication between the domain controllers actually works. And to be honest, we've got two choices. You can use IP, which is super fast because the chances are you're using broadband, or you can use an older protocol, for example, SMTP, which is actually an email protocol, and that can be scheduled. So, for example, if you happen to have a very slow link, you could potentially schedule that. All right. Now, I mentioned that's the basics, as I said, of intersite and intrasite. Okay, so that's the first thing there. Now, the other tool that I just wanted to show you was Active Directory domains and trusts. Now, in this example, we only have one domain that we're dealing with here. And if I just click into here, you can see that this is to do with your domains or your forests. Now, when we talk about a forest, is if I installed Active Directory, another install of Active Directory, it could say, do you want to join this forest, or do you want to create what we call a branch? So, for example, you might create a child domain, so us.adatum.com, india.adatum.com, and so on. So we can create those here, all right? Now, if I go into properties, you can see that if I have, this is where you can actually create relationships between other forests. So if you were working with business partners, for example, or you were, let's say, a group of companies, you could establish trust relationships between those organizations. And I'm going to cover this in a future session. All right. Now, one really important aspect of Active Directory, ladies and gentlemen, is if I go back into users and computers, you'll see that in users and computers here, I've got a series of organizational units, and here's the one that I created earlier. Now, if I click into View and go into, let's say, Advanced Features, you'll now notice that I can see an awful lot more, and I'm now actually seeing hidden objects. And one of those hidden objects is lost and found. Now, if you delete something in Active Directory, obviously it goes to a recycle bin. Well, actually it doesn't, because you need to actually switch this feature on. And you can either switch the feature on via PowerShell, or you can go into Tools, and if you go into the Active Directory Admin Center here, and I've mentioned this previously on one of my videos for deploying Azure AD Connect. So in essence, what we do is I click into my local domain here, and again, this is just the Admin Center is just another viewing tool, and I can manage the various nodes and the various features. But the key thing here is we have this Enable Recycle bin here, and you can go in and you can switch that on. And the idea of this is if you accidentally now delete any objects, they will go to that recycle bin, and you can restore your users. Okay. So there we go, just a little look at the logical aspect of Active Directory. We created some users, we created a group, and we looked at the physical side of Active Directory. So there you have it, Active Directory, Windows Server. To be honest, it's a product that's not really changed in many years. But again, like I said at the beginning, it's so important at the moment, especially if you're learning cloud computing, especially if you're going to be learning hybrid, especially the security aspects of it. Well, hey, look, I really appreciate you stopping by. If you've enjoyed the video, give me a big thumbs up. It really does help my channel. And of course, if you've not subscribed, go ahead, click on that subscribe button, ring the bell, and you won't miss out on future tutorials. And as always, I love comments, your questions, and any feedback about this or any of my other videos. All right, so that's it for this week. You stay safe, and I'll see you next time around. Take care. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.